Yo, what's up guys, I'm Dunmere, top 100 tank player, and here is a balanced patch discussion and tier list for Season 3 of Overwatch 2. Alright, starting off with Reinhardt, he did get a change to the knockback impulse of his primary fire. It was reduced from 10 to 6. It's really not that substantial of a change as it isn't necessarily a buff or a nerf, it's just neutral, having benefits and negatives in different situations. But his charge cooldown was reduced from 8 to 7 seconds, which is definitely a solid buff. His fire strike damage was increased from 90 to 100, which is useful. I mean, more damage the better, right? And it also enables him to one-shot throwing it through a Baptiste window, which is something that you could definitely see coming back if you're playing with Baptiste and if Baptiste gets stronger. So to counteract some of this stuff, they changed the Earth Shatter direct damage from 250 to 170. So that's a nerf because they don't want him to be able to one-shot anymore. However, they did buff the knockdown duration from 2.5 to 2.75 seconds to try and counteract that. But as you'll see with some of the tanks here, they also increase the time it takes to get his ultimate by 7%. So where does that leave Reinhardt? Reinhardt's definitely stronger, but he's still really not the strongest. I know a lot of people want him to be, and people talk about him being like the most fun tank to have, which I partially agree on that. I like Winston too in that. But anyway, so the issue with Reinhardt is that Reinhardt gets bullied by Orisa. And Orisa is a major issue that he will have to play against because Orisa is going to be in the game a lot. Similarly, he also has problems with Ramattra. But for Orisa, she's honestly just going to walk into him, pop her javelin spin, push him around, throw her spear into his face, and stop him from doing what he wants to do, which is push forward, control areas of the map, and there's just nothing he can really do. Any sort of swings he's putting into Orisa is not going to be doing any damage, really. She's going to be like laughing it off as she walks away. The range damage you can apply won't be enough to, like, you know, do any sort of harm to her backline. And anytime he gets somewhere, if he gets like nanoed or something like that, he's just gonna be pushed back by Orisa. So it's really, really rough right now for him in that. Comparing it to Ramattra, who is another character that's gonna be quite frequently played, is that he's just not as flexible. They may not seem like the most same character, but they kind of are in a way, particularly when Ramattra changes his form to Nemesis form. What you're going to see is that early in the fight, Ramattra is going to be putting out some extra damage, putting out the area of effect slow, putting out a shield for his team, and giving overall more benefit to his team from range because he can apply damage also. But what you're going to especially see is that Reinhardt is less flexible because he can't protect himself as well. As much as Reinhardt seems like he should probably be like the tankiest tank in the game, he's not, and he really hasn't been for a long time. If you are playing against something like a Winston, and the Winston jumps behind you, puts a bubble down, and you're split from your Ana or your Kiriko or whatever, it gets pretty rough. It gets to be a pretty awkward situation for you. However, on the opposite side of that, if you're the Ramattra that situation happens, you just pop Nemesis form, and then you just go bully the enemy team, or you sit there and hold your arms up and you just don't really die. So Reinhardt is just getting outplayed. He's not able to do what he wants to, and he is in a situation where he's just weaker than other choices. The issue with Reinhardt really is that he severely misses having an off tank. Reinhardt is very, very specified into having a close range effect. So he can basically go into an area and secure it, right? But because he doesn't have an off tank to help enforce that space, he can't really hold it as much. His shield health is lower, and he doesn't have like a D.Va there to DM extra damage and stop enemies from pushing into him. But most importantly, he doesn't have a character that can help support around him. So whereas before a D.Va could be playing in the back line, and if a Tracer flanks or whatever, or a Winston tries to dive over the Reinhardt, the D.Va could bully it away. But now you don't have that, and so you just have this very one-sided character in a game that's becoming increasingly more complex and needing complexity. So unless he gets some sort of like wild buff that just lets him frag out, he's not really going to be that strong in general. And where is that putting him? It's just the situation with the tanks in general, and you'll notice it as I go through this, is that if a character isn't able to just like reach out and grab value, then they're not going to be that powerful. When you have something like a Roadhog, who was just like last minute just hooking something, killing it, boom, 4v5, right? Or now you have like a Ramattra who's just consistently like, I don't die, I chase down things and kill them. Orisa also, I just never die. Just these very set in stone value that's not needing a lot of help and can just guarantee something. That's what you're going to see about making the tanks, what's going to make the tank stronger. Reinhardt doesn't have that. So that's his problem. And because of that, Reinhardt is getting put in the lower portion of the I'm judging you category. Can be good, but situationally lower here. If you're good at Reinhardt, then you're higher. But if it's like a medium pick for you, Reinhardt's just really like not the play. Yeah, we'll put in the lower category. So now for the Omnic hating Russian herself, Zarya. Her ult cost was increased by 8%. It's obviously a nerf, but it's not so substantial that it's going to really change her position in the meta, so not really that big of a deal. It does make her weaker though, obviously. However, Zarya in general is not really as strong as she once was, but a good Zarya player is still quite oppressive. She did get some buffs last patch, making her charge stay up more consistently, but again, those changes aren't so dramatic that something's really crazy happening with her. Zarya is kind of just a solid sleeper pick. So the reason for that is because she can really just control a lot of space around her with her bubbles, because obviously now she can put them both on herself. So she can walk into you, beam you down with this huge heavy damage, and just kind of sit there and laugh at you, especially in low ranks, which we'll get to on that. Zarya is a very solid choice against Ramattra and Orisa, which are two of the characters you'll see are quite powerful this meta. Not necessarily is she like, you know, a counter to them, but they aren't hard counting her either, because she can kind of sit there and beam them down in the face and pressure them out and force them to play well, and force them to try and do something against her. As I was saying, Zarya is particularly strong in lower ranks, so if you are anywhere below like Masters, then go on ahead and pick up Zarya. I mean, like I said, she's good in general, so you can climb with her too, but she's just very powerful, and that is because people don't actually shoot her. They see the bubble come up and they're like, oh, well, can't shoot her because she's gonna get charged up. And I get it. I don't like playing against a 100 charge Zarya just walking into me and beaming me down, but you have to understand, if you don't shoot her, you don't ever kill her, especially with having 2 bubbles being put on herself now. Like, yeah, don't free charge her when she's just walking up out of spawn, but if she pops a bubble, burn it so you can burn her. The more she has her bubble up and she's just sitting there, that's that whole free time that she can sit there and just beam your team down and you will die. So overall, she's just a pretty solid pick. Nothing too crazy. Lower ranks, like I said, she's definitely better because people just don't know how to beat her. So go ahead and pick her up. And because of that, we're going to put her in the high category, which just means that not the best choice, but still a solid choice overall. Now for my favorite and most played character, Winston, we have a shield health nerf from 700 to 650. Don't really know why they did that. It's more or less completely inconsequential, but I guess they didn't want him to feel left out. So we have the change. However, regardless of this is going to be one of the best metas for Winston that he's had in a very, very long time. And that is because he had a nerf to his 2 biggest counters, Hog and Mercy. Now, those might sound a little bit weird because for Roadhog, he wasn't actually nerfed into Winston, considering he wasn't one-shotting Winston in the first place. And with his whole Hog being buffed, he'll bully Winston even harder. But it all comes down to perception. People don't play characters very consistently that other people say are bad. Everyone thinks Roadhog is like the worst character in the game now from the nerfs, so people just won't play him. And so you'll go on Winston, you can go and terrorize the enemy, and they'll sit there like, oh wow man, I wish there was something we could do to take care of this monkey that's just jumping around on top of us. It's Roadhog, but they won't play him, right? So we're in the clear on that. However, the other one is Mercy, and it doesn't really seem like Mercy would be the biggest counter to Winston, but she was. The reason is because the way that she was healing targets, if she was healing something you were diving onto, they were absolutely unkillable. So if you're diving, for example, like an Ashe, the Mercy just looks at her, beams her, and the Ashe just sits there and shoots you in the face. And so yeah, you can take her out of the game for like 5 seconds or so until you jump out, right? But is trading your whole self just to sit on top of an Ashe for a little bit, like really how you should be playing Overwatch right now? No, because this game is all about fragging now, to be completely honest, and that doesn't let you frag. But because of Mercy being changed, she is now super easy to dive comparatively before. So before, you couldn't dive the Mercy because she could just run away from you constantly. Like, it was like borderline impossible. Even with Primal, you just couldn't kill her. And then she valked and she just absolutely ran away. You were completely at the mercy of your teammates. Like, I used to just yell at my teammates, not actually, but just beg them to shoot the Mercy. And then maybe if she was killed, I could actually play the game, right? It was really painful to play against Mercy. Like, she was honestly a harder counter than Roadhog was. But now she's actually diveable, so she won't be being played as much either because of perception, and also because she's just not quite as good. But so these 2 biggest counters of Winston are gone, so Winston's gonna go have fun. You know, you see the enemy playing like an Ana Zenyatta, Ana Lucio, whatever, you're gonna go just enjoy your time, right? Not a lot of stuns in the game anymore. You're tanky enough to like commit to hard dives frequently, so it's gonna be pretty fun. I'm excited, to be completely honest. However, in addition to this, because of the way that he was changed in Overwatch 2 with the way that the armor nerfs were, or the armor changes were adjusted, where it's only like a 30% flat reduction instead of being like, instead of being increased with smaller bursts of damage and not as powerful with large bursts of damage, Winston is a lot better at just tanking damage in general, in addition to getting some extra HP. So when you're playing against characters like Torb and Reaper that were normally like very questionable picks, you don't really have to worry about it as much. Also, something like Brigida isn't in the game, so you can just consistently play into like everything now that's not Roadhog and Mercy, or that isn't Roadhog, and that's not gonna be in the game that much. So it's a good situation for Winston. Also, with the adjustments to his secondary fire, he can put out a large chunk of damage, which lets you frag pretty hard now. That, plus your bubble just being a very, very consistent source of tankiness, is putting him in a very strong position. Whereas if you compare him to something like D.Va or Doomfist, they might dive in and engage on the enemy backline and they're doing like an equally good job distracting the enemy, but with the shield, but they don't have this consistency of a shield that's sitting there tanking enemy damage, like random damage shots, tanking, blocking healing between the healers and the tanks or whatever's in front of them. They don't have that. And because Winston has that, it's a consistent benefit you're getting every time you engage. That consistency, in addition to the fact that Winston actually plays with his team before the engagement starts, makes it so that Winston is a very generally consistent character, but it's also capable of aggressing hard onto off angles and controlling enemies who are on the sides of the map, diving onto supports and doing all that. And that's really why he's getting into like quite a good position. He is also good against enemy tanks, more so than Wrecking Ball is. Wrecking Ball is his biggest competition right now for the position of being this high ground tank and dive tank, but Winston is a lot better against other tanks. For example, you split an enemy Reinhardt from his team by putting a bubble behind him, you're getting a lot more value than like a Wrecking Ball is. Also, Wrecking Balls doesn't push enemy tanks as far now because of the way that they adjusted because of the way they made the knockback not as effective against them. So Winston gets a lot of value in that. And so you can just consistently pressure enemy supports, you can pressure enemy DPS, and even pressure a lot of the enemy tanks. Some of them not so much, but in that case, you don't really need to be doing that. He also synergizes quite well with some of the supports in the game that are really strong right now, like Kiriko he does well with, Ana he does very, very well with, and Lucio also does great with. So this is honestly just putting Winston in a very good position, potentially one of the best positions. And so he is in the I Heart You at like the very close to the top of that. So having covered some of the older tanks, now it's time to talk about the newest one, Ramattra. So Ramattra did get the promised changes to his ultimate. Instead of it being permanently non-decaying when he's nearby enemies, it now slowly decays over time when near them and has a maximum cap of 20 seconds. It's a little bit confusing on how this works, but basically if you pop it on top of an enemy and just sit there, it'll maximally last for 20 seconds. But if you pop it and then you walk onto a target when it's halfway decayed, it will then last for 10 seconds. So it is a pretty healthy nerf to it, but 20 seconds is still a long time. So if you're using it effectively, you're still gonna get a lot of value out of the ultimate. They did, however, also raise the cost to get it by 12%. So again, some solid nerfs, but Ramattra deals a lot of damage. So it's not that big of a deal, to be completely honest. So moving on. Ramattra is a true hybrid tank, meaning he has the ability to play as a spam tank, spamming from range, applying damage, putting up shields to support his team in this long-range battle. However, he also has the ability to swap into being a pure brawler, which is really cool. I honestly really like Ramattra a lot. But he puts out a lot of solo value in this. What I've been saying is that any tank, any character that just puts out like raw numbers, raw potential, raw capability, obviously, and not being based on nuance, is a very strong tank right now. And Ramattra does a lot of that. He has consistency from spam before the fight starts, whereas something like Reinhardt has like basically no ability to do that. He's popping in on his slows with the choke, putting up a shield for his team, walking off a Widowmaker, whatever. And then when the fight really gets down into it, he's popping his Nemesis form and absolutely fragging out. With that, he also has the ability to self-sustain himself a lot. And that's one of Ramattra's most powerful things. And if you've heard any news about what they're doing in Overwatch League, they talk about Ramattra just sitting there and just holding up his shield and just not dying, right, until he gets his ultimate. And so you're going to see a lot of that. But you also have just a lot of capability to walk into people. Because in addition to that, they made it so he has an additional speed buff to his Nemesis form, meaning when you feel like popping your Nemesis form, you just walk forward and start punching enemies in the face. And they don't really expect you to do that much damage, but you do, and then they die, and it's pretty fun. He also is solid against most other tanks, and he's great into others like Rein and Sigma. It's pretty fun to just punch them through their shield. It's very similar to what Winston does, but then you're also just beating them at their game in the first place, particularly against Reinhardt because you can brawl against him. And so you're just punching them through their shield. They're just kind of sitting there like, dude, I have a shield. Why is this happening, right? But you're still able to play effectively into them. And since Ramattra has a great ability to defend himself, like for example, if he gets split from his team by a Winston bubble, he just pops his Nemesis form and shields himself. Since he has the capability to do that, he plays well into like every other character. Winston or Wrecking Ball isn't that big of a deal. Doomfist isn't that big of a deal. D.Va isn't either. He doesn't have any issue with Junker Queen. Kind of has some problems with Orisa. Sigma is, like I said, not a problem, but his biggest counter, Roadhog, is not going to be played that much, as I've been mentioning. Again, people will think that Roadhog's garbage, and so they won't play into him. They won't swap Roadhog to counter the Ramattra. So this is putting Ramattra in a very good position, and currently he is what I would call the best tank. So for this cow, horse, creature thing, Orisa, she didn't get any nerfs this patch, but last patch's nerfs of dropping her Fortify by 50 HP gained are substantial, but not substantial enough to stop her from being absolutely crazy and unkillable. Thanks, Blizzard. But she still is very, very strong, simply because of the fact that she just doesn't die. If you cycle your Javelin Spin and your Fortify, only using them when you need to, you really should be the last person to die on your team every single fight if your team is losing. In addition to that, she has very solid damage. She has an amazing stun ability that she can use to bully other tanks, bully like a Widowmaker off on the side of the map. There's just a lot that she can do, like a surprisingly high amount that she can do versus what she should be able to do, right? She's very good into a lot of the characters that are going to be on the weaker side of the scale. She's very good into Reinhardt. She's very good into Doomfist. She bullies Junker Queen. She is solid into Roadhog, Ramattra, Zarya, and Sigma, and her biggest counters are Winston and Ball. Winston and Ball are good, but the thing is, it's not so much an issue of her being countered as more of the rest of your team being countered. Because if Orisa gets her backline being dove, or she gets split from her team by a Winston bubble, it doesn't really matter, because like I said, she doesn't die. So if the rest of your team is playing consistently, and the enemy isn't putting like five people into diving your backline, your biggest counters aren't really that big of a deal either. So Orisa is just a strong pick in basically any situation because of that survivability and because of the ability to stun whoever she wants, stop ultimates, do whatever, bully the enemy team, chase down targets, and do whatever. Her ultimate, of course, isn't very strong, so if you're trying to really deadlift your games playing in solo, maybe there's better choices than Orisa, but regardless, she's still very, very, very powerful, and she is also getting put into the I Heart You category. Somewhere in between these guys, I would say. Partially just because she doesn't require as much skill to play, to be completely honest with you guys, whereas Winston will get a lot more value if you're good at him, and a solid portion less if you're not. Moving on to D.Va, we have a character who's just honestly in a pretty awkward position. The reason is because as a solo tank, you have a responsibility to take care of your team from a frontline perspective early on in the fight, and she can't really do that. So compare her to characters like Ramattra, Zarya, Orisa, or even Winston, who fills a similar diver role. She just doesn't give her team what they need early on in the fight. Now, this could be taken advantage of and could be okay if she could get enough advantage in the mid fight by diving into the enemy team. But the problem with that is that there's a lot of strong supports in the game that are resistant to dive. Even characters that should be diveable really aren't and are going to be an expensive kill. Even something like Zenyatta, who can just kick you off of him. Like, yeah, you'd probably be able to kill him, but it's probably going to cost you your mech, right? And is that a good trade? Not really. There's also the fact that she doesn't have a shield like Winston does to just guarantee value. And considering she's competing with Winston for this diver spot, that's a problem. Winston jumps in, puts down the shield, is blocking healing, blocking damage. D.Va's only blocking it if she's actively matrixing. And if she's actively matrixing, she's not outputting damage. So she's not actually able to be trading resources properly and forcing the enemy supports into awkward positions. And also, she doesn't get the guaranteed CC, the guaranteed crowd control of Wrecking Ball. So, you know, yeah, she flies in, she pushes enemies around, but she's not just slamming them up in the air meanwhile she's filling the same role. So basically, if you're trying to play a dive tank, then you should be playing Winston or Wrecking Ball. Again, she's not terrible, she's just getting outplayed by the fact that she can no longer be an off tank and she can no longer fill in and play another role, but now she has to be the main character that's playing out in front of her team. She can't do that, so she's in an awkward position. So having said that, that's going to put her in the lower portion of meh. As for Sigma, he does actually get a little bit of a nerf in this patch, with his ultimate cost being increased by 7%. It's not an absolutely crazy change, though it is kind of weird, because his ultimate wasn't that strong in the first place, as Kiriko is just Suzuing it every time he uses it anyway. But regardless of that, he's not very strong anyway, because you have Ramattra and Winston in the meta who are constantly just going to be pressuring him. Ramattra has a more or less even early fight, pops down his shield, throws out his vortex, and is doing a solid amount of spam damage at range. Then when he gets close on the Sigma, it gets really rough for the Sigma, and he pops Nemesis form and just punches him in the face constantly. Sigma can't withstand that and will have to back up over time. It's not a good situation for the Sigma, and you don't want to be in it, so you can't really play Sigma into Ramattra. With Winston, it's honestly like Sigma is the dive target. I play a lot of Winston, I do this a lot. You can jump on top of the Sigma, pressure him, pop your bubble, and since he doesn't have the damage to be able to break it, or damage you enough really, he just has to sit there and just kind of kite the area and back up. Not only are you putting the shield around him or behind him where he can't get any healing, but you're also just making it so he can't do anything. So it's a really awkward situation for him. And considering Ramattra and Winston are going to be a lot stronger, you're going to have a hard time. So having said that, Sigma is in a situation in which he's not terrible when he's playing against other characters like that. Like if you are playing against like a Doomfist or a Roadhog or a Drunker Queen or whatever, which are in general not that great to start with. But if you are playing with those characters, then you can make it work. So if you like playing Sigma, if you're good with him, then go ahead and do it. But regardless of this sort of stuff, it's putting him in a pretty low portion of the category. And if you're playing against this Ramattra or this Winston, you're getting put even lower. Like even lower. It's definitely really rough when you're playing Sigma against them. So for Roadhog, he had some changes to the way his whole hog works. The duration of it is being increased from 6 to 8 seconds, and the ultimate cost to counteract this is being increased by 8%. So it's going to take a little bit longer to get it, but you now have it for 33% longer, which is definitely a buff in my opinion. Having said that, the hook nerfs from last patch are very substantial. He doesn't get this sort of easy hook kill, I win, you cry value that he used to have, and so that's definitely knocking him down from being this must pick that he was before. However, I'm going to get a little bit controversial here and say that he's still a really good pick because of what I'm going to talk about right now. Roadhog is the biggest counter to 3 of the tanks that are going to be meta in this next patch, which are Winston, Ramattra, and Wrecking Ball. So for Winston, it's miserable to play against Roadhog. You walk into him, pumping full of shotgun shots in the face, hook him when he tries to jump away or jump in or whatever, and then when you have your whole hog, you just completely counter his ultimate. It's miserable, it's not fun to play against, and you have the capability to stop Winston from playing the game if you go Roadhog. It's not going to happen that much because a lot of people won't be actually realizing this and playing Roadhog, and they'll think he's just absolute garbage tier, but you can completely deny Winston. For Ramattra, it's very easy to just sit there and just chunk him full of damage in the face, and then when he pops in a Nemesis form and panics and starts shielding himself, you hook him and pump him full of more damage, and you can get a full shot in before he's able to shield himself again. So you're very good at countering him, especially if you use your whole hog to counter his ultimate. So again, Roadhog being used in this like highly counter-based situation is very valuable. With Wrecking Ball also, you're very good at countering. You see ball come in, he slams, wait until he slams. If your aim isn't that great, hook him, or hook him out of the air and just bully him, kill him with your whole hog, have fun. Same situation, Roadhog is very powerful in this. However, if you're not playing against these tanks or a Doomfist, you're not going to be getting quite as much value with him. Yes, you still have good matchups against something like Reinhardt and even D.Va. I know people say that he doesn't, but you can just hook her and burn her, right? And even against Sigma and things like that, like you're solid, right? But despite of that, it's just not that valuable because he can't secure the one shots as easily that he used to have. They used to be able to. It used to be something that he was really capable of doing. Now it's a skill shot of hitting your right click before your secondary fire before you get the hook, or pulling them into a wall close so you can walk into them and kill them. Whatever it may be, it's just not as consistent. So in those situations, he's a lot lower. But if you are playing against one of these characters, like I said, Ramattra, Winston, Wrecking Ball, even Doomfist, he is extremely good. So if you see one of those and they're just terrorizing your team, then swap Roadhog and then laugh at them as they are confused about why a bad character is winning the game. Having said that, we're going to put Roadhog for counter purposes. We're going to put him at the very like bottom of I love you. For standard purposes, we're putting him at the high of well, we're going to put like for standard purposes, we're putting him a bit lower, but he's going to end up in this middle section here of the very top. For Junker Queen, she ends up having her HP increased by 25 this patch. So that's obviously not a really massive change, and therefore will definitely not be changing my evaluation of her being garbage. I really do think that she is hot trash. I get it, she clicks on some heads and it feels good to play her, but she doesn't provide anything to her team that another tank doesn't do better. For example, in frontline pressure, Hog, Zarya, Ramattra, and Orisa all do it better. For team sustain, which is what she used to be played for, D.Va, Ryan, and Sigma do it better. For aggro pushing, Winston, Ball, Orisa, Ramattra, Ryan are better, and even for her hook, quote unquote, Roadhog's is better. The reason that she's not very good is really all about the fact that she just doesn't have a true strength that makes her something you should play. And her numbers are also kind of low, particularly like with the sustain numbers, the thing that used to be making her meta of hitting that commanding shout and then giving a bunch of HP to her team so they can just go running like it's goats again. That no longer exists. It's significantly weaker, and therefore she doesn't have something that's really, really making her strong. Also, on top of that, she has an absolute garbage ultimate that is countered by the character that is always going to be in your games, Kiriko. If Kiriko is not in the game, then it's a pretty solid ultimate, but she will be there. So having said all that, and the fact that she's not even good as like a hot swap, like something like Roadhog is, swapping into counter like Winston or Ramattra and Doomfist, she's just garbage. If you like her and you have fun and you win with her, then go play her. Like, a lot of the characters in the game are pretty decent, so it's not much that she's just incapable of doing anything, but I do honestly believe that she's the worst character in the game right now. Again, I'll probably get some heat for that, and I'm sorry if I do, kind of, not really, but because of that, she's being put into the very bottom of you and your hero are trash. Sorry guys. For Doomfist, he doesn't get any changes this balance patch. Now, if you consider Roadhog's changes in the last patch and the fact that Roadhog is just not really going to be played that much anymore, he's getting an indirect big buff. But regardless of that, he's still in a very similar situation to Junker Queen, which is that other characters do what he does a lot better. If you look at something like Winston and Ball, they just dive better than him. For CCing enemies, Ball does it a lot better, hits him up into the air consistently, and will be able to do even more consistently with the buffs that he got. As a frontliner, which is something he really shouldn't be doing that much, Zarya, Orisa, Ryan, or Ramattra are all better, and just for damage and for fragging, they're just better characters to play. This is why he's being put in a very awkward situation, like I said, with Junker Queen, and so it's a very rough situation in general. Also, to get decent value out of him, he's very, very skill necessary, so he can be inconsistent on top of that. If you're great at him, then you can get good value for sure, don't get me wrong. But he's also easily countered by Hog and Orisa, so if people do want to counter you, they will. If I'm playing against a Doomfist, I hop into Hog and I make him have a very hard time. Also, something that's going to be pretty prevalent in the game, Lucio and Ana, they are going to be doing a pretty decent amount of countering into him also. So the thing with Doomfist is that he doesn't really have these strengths and is only really playing to like get max value out of his kit and counter bad players. So Doomfist is being put not as bad as Junker Queen, but pretty low onto the hasn't unlocked any other hero, what's going on type of category. And last we have Wrecking Ball, who got a lot of balance changes this patch, really useful ones too. He had 150 HP taken away from him, but then was given 150 shields. So that means 150 HP will be able to be regened, so any sort of little poke damage he's taking won't really be that big of a deal now. Really, really useful. He also had the cooldown on his pile driver reduced from 10 to 8 seconds, which is a big, big change. Honestly, kind of a wild change. He had a nerf though of his ultimate cost being increased by 9%, but to counteract that, the time for his ultimate to activate after it's been launched was changed from 1.5 seconds to 1 second, which is kind of wild, to be honest. The fact that the mines are going to be going off half a second faster is going to allow you to secure a lot more kills than you would have been able to before. So don't really know if this is going to be a little bit too much, to be honest. There's a decent chance it is, and people are going to be frustrated, but we will see. So to put this into concepts, The shield and slam buffs are just absolutely massive to his uptime. Uptime is really, really, really important for tanks, where they can just continually be an ever-present force for the team, especially on Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball doesn't do anything for his team until he engages, and so the fact that he can engage and then go off and then come back in without having to get health, and then slam because the cooldown is now reduced and get like 2 of those off a fight is really, really, really valuable. This was already on top of the fact that Wrecking Ball could do this a lot anyway if you were good enough with him, because they reduce a lot of the stuns from the game and they give him extra HP. So in Overwatch 1, if you were playing and there was a Cassidy, you get stunned and you'd be knocked down to like 100 HP or even maybe die. In Overwatch 2, that's just not really the case, and you can engage anywhere and everywhere and you're gonna be kind of chilling. But this is now a situation of, in Overwatch 1, you were considering just taking death by engaging and slamming. Now it's like, oh, how many do I get off in this fight consistently without having to go and get health? You can get 2 like minimum in a span of 8 seconds after you hit the slam, and sometimes up to 3, especially if you have like a little Ana that's sitting in the back like hitting you once or twice when you're doing it. So it is a huge buff to that. Also, he's getting an indirect buff of Mercy being weaker now. Mercy has a high ability to counter dive players because you dive onto something and then she just pockets what you're trying to kill. And then last patch, it was impossible to kill her, just like with Winston, so she'd just kind of fly off and then jump around in 2 million different directions every single 1.5 seconds, and it was just miserable. But now she's a lot easier to kill, and so if you're hunting her as Wrecking Ball, you'll have a lot of fun. Also, she won't be in the game as much because people just won't be playing her as much. Anyone who isn't like a Mercy one trick just won't really want to play her, to be honest. So that means you'll have a lot more fun playing against other characters, because you go off and dive onto a Widowmaker who's off by herself. She no longer has a Mercy flying in to save her. Instead, she has like maybe a Kiriko jumping in to throw a Suzu at her, but then the Kiriko's use all her abilities and you've gotten great value and you can maybe even still kill the Widowmaker. So it's a huge buff to Wrecking Ball in this, and he's going to be so much more free in general. However, Wrecking Ball does still have the weakness of just not providing any tank pressure before any of this stuff goes on. In Overwatch 1, he could go run up on a flank, sneak up behind the enemy team and get ready to slam, and you'd have like a D.Va or a Sigma or whatever standing there to tank for their team. But now you don't. Now you completely take away your tank presence and you basically say, hey, you don't have a tank now, but in the middle of the fight, I'm gonna hit a nice fat slam. So, good? Is that good enough for you guys? But that's the situation with him now. However, regardless of that, and especially if you're good with your timing, he's a lot stronger now. And he's a character that is heavily thrives or flounders based off of people's perception. If people think he's bad, then you try and play him, they'll throw your game. And if people think he's good, then he is good, and you can go have fun and actually play the game with him. I have a lot of time on Ball. I like playing Ball a lot, but I've definitely had a lot of people rage at me for playing the character. So that's the situation with Ball. And because of that, and because of perception going up, it looks like Ball is getting put in the top of this area of I love you. With all these 4 tanks being relatively similar, they're all quite powerful. Definitely a step above the ones below them, and in a very good situation overall. Thanks so much for watching, and if I helped you out with this video, then help me out by hitting a subscribe. Thanks, guys.